Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We're starting our weekend off right with watches, and everything you see here is for sale and in stock. Reach out to me directly at my email, tmosso@thewatchbox.com, with questions about the pricing of these watches, their availability, accessories, and condition, and I'm always looking to build inventory. The fall is a big time for me, and if you want to trade a watch or sell a watch, we are paying top dollar, we pay cash, we pay fast, no upper limit on value paid. We will buy your entire collection of Patek Philippe Grand Complications in platinum, and we will do so with a bank wire. To buy, trade, or sell, reach out to me directly, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Let's get started with a couple of classics, starting with the thumbnail watch. You guys have asked me to show the thumbnail watch first, and I'm going to try to oblige. Right here we have a 2021 model Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso Tribute Small Second, now available pre-owned. It is stainless steel, just over 45.6 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, 8.7 millimeters thick. Impressive considering the rotating case in the solid chassis. And then across the case, it is 27.4 millimeters. This is a watch that wears beautifully on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. It's based on the color dial series that JLC launched in the Reverso Tribute Small Seconds back in 2018 with the blue dial that could become eggplant under the right light. After that came the burgundy, and now we have the green, which is very much of our time, but has a classical enduring beauty that is guaranteed to age well. It's very similar in size to the old Grand Tie case, so I've owned two of those. I loved them. It's perfect for my wrist, and I can also see this working on a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. Once again, my wrist is 16 centimeters. As you can see, it features a canted case back. This is something JLC's been working into the Reversos since 2016, and it also features the post-2016 off-centered sunburst inside the chassis. Caliber 822 with a buff case back. You can have this customized just like the original Reversos. Solid and robust on the reverse side to protect what was then a glass crystal, and then and now a wonderful canvas for customization. The manual wind movement in this watch with a power reserve of 45 hours. We're going to stick with JLC, and maybe a modern day classic we'll call this one, because this is their first ever complete calendar moon phase wristwatch chronograph. It is the Master Control calendar chronograph. It's a triple date with a moon phase, 40 millimeters in stainless steel with JLC's manufacturer caliber 759 on the reverse side. This is a 65-hour power reserve featuring both a column wheel and a vertical clutch. You can see the column wheels visible with real fire blued screws. It's an attractive looking movement that goes through the Master 1000 hours control. A fully cased up test of the entire watch, testing chronometry, power reserve, winding efficiency, water resistance, and overall durability. Launched in 1992, the Master 1000 Hours Control was one of the first in-house timing standards and overall capability standards to surpass the COSC. Now, of course, you can see the 40 millimeter watch wears beautifully. It's nice and thin on the wrist at about 11 millimeters thick. It is loomed. It is a wonderful all-arounder. Pull tab spring bars to remove the strap from the case, and a quick release on the buckle so you can remove it from the straps. You can swap straps without any tools at all. They keep coming in the form of the 2015 Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch Apollo 13 anniversary. Now, of course, this watch right here was the 45th anniversary watch, and a lovely timepiece it is. 42 millimeters in stainless steel, and that's just about the only stock feature of the watch externally, as we immediately get into a ceramic tachymeter insert and a dial with tack that is spectacularly loomed, as the indices themselves are actually solid blocks of luminova, and you could see they have height above the dial. They're actually voluminous. They're not just printed features, they're actually applied blocks of luminova, and you're looking at a negative black ink at the center. Snoopy himself is fully loomed, and of course you could see that the watch is no mean moonwatch, with a white and black dial designed to emulate the Charles Schulz comic strips that made Snoopy and the Peanuts characters famous. There's a little bit more comic imagery. As you can see, the thought bubble, failure is not an option. That's actually a line from the movie Apollo 13. And then right here, what could you do in 14 seconds, represented by comic strip frames over the first 14 seconds of the dial. 14 seconds, one of the firing sequences of the rockets that helped the crippled command capsule return to Earth. And of course, that 14-second firing sequence was timed with an Omega Speedmaster professional. You can see the hands have all been blackened to contrast nicely against the white base, and bubble characters are used for the numerals of the sub-registers. Turn it all over, and they save the best for the case back. You have the image of the silver Snoopy. Actually, this is an AG 925 sterling silver Snoopy, hand engraved by an artisan at Omega. We also have a vitreous enamel base, so fired Grand Faux enamel with metallic elements representing the cosmos. The Silver Snoopy Award was awarded by the astronauts themselves to high-performing suppliers and employees of NASA space operations. So this was actually given to Omega in, I believe it was October of 1970. That was when the actual award was given by the astronauts to Omega representatives. And of course, you could see it as a limited edition 1,970. It has a Moonwatch caliber inside. You can see it even features a unique strap with a contrasting stitch. It's a Moonwatch caliber inside, so Lamagna-based caliber 1861, lateral clutch, cam-operated, manual wind, 48-hour power reserve, and this watch does feature a sapphire crystal, a very special modern piece, maybe the ultimate Speedmaster limited edition. And yes, I'm counting all of the other Speedmaster limited editions. That might be the best. Okay, here's a watch that represents probably the closest living descendant of the original 1953 Rolex Submariner, sometimes described as the no-date sub. The reference 114060 is part of a series that Rolex describes only as Submariner. Technically, you have Submariners, which is what we have here, and then you have Submariner dates, which are the subs with the date. So this is not a no-date, it is a Submariner. Launched in 2012 and made through 2020, this version of the Submariner is 40 millimeters with a super case, ceramic bezel insert, a very finely gradiated 120 click bezel. You can see the numerals and the indices inside the bezel are actually deposited platinum. The dial is lacquered. The hands and the indices are white gold to resist tarnish and oxidation. All of this is water resistant down to 300 meters. It's got a 48-hour automatic winding power reserve. It's anti-magnetic, shock resistant, water resistant. It is a chronometer, and it features the Rolex Glide Lock system. So we pop open the clasp, and you can see we have 20 millimeters of tool-free adjustment in 2 millimeter increments. So you can pull it all the way out and use it as an extension over a dive suit, or you can make little 2 millimeter adjustments to fine-tune the sizing. It wears, well, it wears fairly large for a 40. As on the wrist, it gives you the impression more of a 42 than a 40 millimeter. You can see this is substantially bigger to the eye than the 40 millimeter JLC chronograph we had before. But that's okay, because the watch is designed to have presence without physically taking up too much real estate. It'll fit on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference, and it's thin for a dive watch, which means it will also slide well underneath a dress cuff. We'll do a quick lume shot, because hey, it's a dive watch. And you can see it uses Rolex Chromolite Blue lume. Let's go with another diver. This one you might not be expecting. Let's see. Can you guess? Did you guess correctly? And we have right here, it is the Zinoman U2, also known as the EZM5. This watch right here, technically known as the U2S. You can see U2 Schwarz. It is a Schwarz black watch. But it's more than a black watch, as Zin always uses its hard black coating over a tegmented base. So tegment makes the basic metal, its carbon diffusion, of the bracelet and the case 1,200 Vickers hard. The hard black is then over 2,000 Vickers, the idea being that with a tegmented base metal, the base metal is not soft enough to collapse under the hard black coating. So if it gets hit, it doesn't dent and it doesn't crack. The problem with conventional hard black watches is though the coating is hard, the metal underneath is not. Zin does away with that eggshell collapse problem by putting a hardened steel underneath a hardened coating. 44 millimeters, this watch features all of Zin's toys. First, you can see it's based on a Sellita SW330, which is the dual version of the SW300. Dual time in 24-hour and 12-hour format both. It's basically a Sellita version of an ETA 28932. So automatic winding, 42-hour power reserve, very tough, very accurate, dual time. It has both a quick set for the date and a quick set for the second time zone, which is not universal among watches with a second time zone. You don't get a quick set for the date on a Rolex GMT, for example. You have to keep wheeling the local hour hand. Now, it uses the AR dehumidification system. It hasn't been argon for quite a while, though they still use the argon chemical symbol. It is now a nitrogen fill inside the case. So when the case is assembled, it is filled with nitrogen to purge all moisture, impurities, and contaminants. You can also see at the base of the dial a copper sulfate capsule. Unlike conventional Zin watches where that resides externally and is screwed into the case, on this extreme 2,000-meter diver, the copper sulfate capsule is actually inside, and you can see that little hole at the base of the dial. It goes from white to dark blue. When it turns dark blue, that means it's done pulling moisture out of the case, and it's time to replace it during a service at Zin. Now, you can see the bezel is a unidirectional rotating countdown bezel. It is also tegmented and hardened and hard black coated, but you can see it has little screws on the side. This is called a captive bezel, and it's one of Zin's distinctive assembly procedures, as it uses this captive bezel that cannot accidentally be snapped off. The screws must be removed for this bezel to be removed. So unlike a Rolex or Omega, you can't knock it off. It also has an off-centered crown, so this 44mm Extreme Diver Dual Time will fit on either left or right wrists. It is an ambidextrous piece. 2,000 meters water resistant, that needs no explanation. But the watch, of course, is an aggressive sports watch, and I would recommend it for a wrist no smaller than 15 centimeters circumference. What's interesting is that even though it is tegment and it is hard black, it is also U-boat steel. U-boat steel starts at about 350 to 400 Vickers, whereas standard 316 and 904L is generally between 200 and 300. So even at its core, even below the tegment and the hard black layers, you still have a harder steel than you would have on a conventional watch, even a stainless steel diver. So this watch offers an awful lot with a matte black dial. It is a mission timer. That's what Einsatzzeitmesser means. It is all of that and resistant to extreme temperatures, up to 80 degrees Celsius and down to negative 45 degrees. How hot and how cold is that? Enough to kill you. That's all you really need to know. Now, jumping to a classic in modern form, we spoke of Rolex, but we spoke of the Sub. Now we speak of the Date 840, and this might be the grandest. Even given that platinum is available, the combination of this olive green metallic sunburst dial with the red gold Ever Rose is special. 40mm, you can see it features the Date 840 case that was launched in 2015, and unlike the Date 82, it features pivoted end links for the President bracelet, so it pulls down around a small wrist and it wears a lot more compact than the giant Date 82, even though at face value the difference between them is only 1mm because of the hollow end links of the bracelet, or I should say pivoted, they're not hollow. It's an easier watch to wear. 70-hour power reserve, shock resistant, anti-magnetic, 100 meters water resistant, double quick set, and then of course we have the President bracelet. And this generation of the President bracelet features ceramic-coated pins inside, a technology that was trialed on the platinum version of the Date 82. All versions of the Date 840 get it. So because they are ceramic-coated, the pins can never be worn down by the gold links, meaning the bracelet can never stretch, as previous Rolex bracelets were prone to do. The watch is gorgeous, comfortable, nicely counterweighted by its bracelet, and I would say it's a unisex option. Realistically, you don't need to buy a 36mm Date 8 to wear it on a smaller wrist or even a female wrist, as this will wear splendidly on a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. You love the red of the Ever Rose rose gold. That's because of its high percentage of copper, and because of its high percentage of platinum, it will not fade over time. It will not fade to pink gold. It will not fade to rose gold. It will stay red. That is why it's called Ever Rose. Now we jump into the world of Ludwig Oxlin and his calendars, as we have an example of his original work with Ulysse Nardin, launched in 1999. This is the GMT Plus Minus Perpetual in white gold, and we have an example of his modern handiwork, as here we have a Ludwig Oxlin Ox und Junior Datum. It is a date watch. It has a power reserve indicator up at 12 o'clock. It has a running seconds indicator down at 6 o'clock. And then it has this radial date that can be set bidirectionally using the crown. The watch is made of blackened titanium, and you can see it's 42mm in diameter, but it's just about 42mm from lug to lug too, because the end of the lug is flush with the case on both sides. So even if you have a tiny wrist of 13 centimeters, you're going to wear this well. Now you can see there are recesses in the case band to allow the strap to move freely. So it really does pull beautifully around a smaller wrist. And you can see the edges of the lugs are nowhere near the edges of my wrist. It has a nickel anthracite coating on the case and a nickel anthracite coating on the dial, which has vertically brushed striations. So it's a brushed dial from top to bottom. The case back, as you can see, is raw with machining marks left intact. It's a screw down crown. It's all 100 meters water resistant, and Ulysse Nardin exclusively authorizes Ox und Junior to use UN movements in their base calibers. So this is a UN 118 silicon escapement, silicon hairspring. It has a bidirectional quickset for the date and a 60-hour power reserve, and I'll show you how this date works right here. It is an unbreakable date that can be moved in either direction. And you could see the green corresponding roughly to the changes in the week. So this is a watch that represents both the day as well as the turn of the week. And you can see how when I turn backwards, I move the green marks relative to the red, and then when I turn forward, I move the red only. So that's how you mark the start of the weeks. The watch wears beautifully, the watch is comfortable, the watch is visually spectacular and super sleek with no overt branding, the definition of confidence and discretion. Now we go back to 1999. Ludwig took its 1994 innovation, which was the plus-minus travel time system, and his 1996 innovation, which was the so-called Perpetual Ludwig Perpetual calendar, and he put them together in one 38.5 millimeter case, and that's what we have right here. GMT plus-minus Perpetual, 38.5 millimeters in white gold. You can see the case features welded lugs, so this is an extensively handmade and hand-finished case. You don't stamp cases with this kind of lug construction. A beautiful watch that's less overtly weird than later UN watches. This is one into which a collector of more classical designs can easily buy and believe. You can see the UN caliber 32, distantly based on a Lamagna automatic on the reverse side, using a visible pawl-based bidirectional winding system magic lever. There's a white gold rotor that features satin striations, rustication or industrial milling, and then beveling on its edge. The screws are fire blued, automatic winding with a lacquered insert featuring the UN anchor logo, and all of this with a 48-hour power reserve. The QP is a special piece. First, you can see I have local time that I can change easily forward or backwards using my pusher adjusters if I'm traveling. Then I have a second time zone in 24-hour format that runs around the outside of the dial. This is a well-loomed dial. It has a very faint vertical satin brushing to its silver dial, and then it has the decade, the year, the day, the month, and then a double-digit date, and all of this features a blocker so you cannot accidentally set it during the nighttime danger zone. Now, for the rest of the day, do my best to find that index right there, you can move the date forward or backwards, and note that I'm changing the month. I can move this perpetual calendar forward or backwards. I can do that without damaging the watch. Very few perpetual calendars can do this, meaning this one will not need to go back to the factory in the year 2100 for an adjustment the way conventional perpetual calendars will. Throw this watch on the wrist, and again, 38.5 millimeters. The 1999 version of this watch, which is what we have here, was beautifully sized and proportioned and perfect. Another great example of high horology complication for him or for her. Now, big wrists in service of a big movie star. This is the 44.5 millimeter Grand Seiko SPGA 405 Spring Drive Godzilla Limited Edition, a 65th anniversary present to Godzilla's most famous on-screen ambassador, I should say Japan's most famous on-screen ambassador. Here you can see it crushing a building from the original Gojira back in 1954, and you can see that proportionally this is the 1954 version of Godzilla. He would get much bigger over time. It is a 650-piece limited edition, and it calls out Tohoku, the owner of the Godzilla trademarks and name. It's 200 meters water resistant, powered by a spring drive caliber 9R15, which is a hot-rodded version of spring drive. As when this watch came out, a standard spring drive 9R65 would have the accuracy of plus or minus 15 seconds a month. This is plus or minus 10 seconds. And you know that's the case because you see that solid gold medallion inside the winding rotor. You can also see the unidirectional governing wheel that allows the power to flow from the spring through the drivetrain that activates the hands. So this watch, though it does have a quartz oscillator, it has only the potential energy of the spring, the kinetic energy created by the spring, and any electrical energy created by an induced electrical current due to the kinetic energy technology of the spring-driven drivetrain. The governing wheel uses a magnetic force to govern the speed of the seconds hand, and then the hour and minute hands are geared to the seconds hand, and that produces this smooth scroll. There is no start, there is no stop. That is distinctive of spring drive. Now, there's a lot of themed Godzilla material here. First, the case, grade 5 titanium, hand-finished against a spinning tin plate. This is the legendary manual Zaratsu polish, of which you've often heard if you've read about Grand Seiko watches, and it's executed beautifully here on titanium. You could see that the bezel features a sapphire cap with a metallized base, which is visually spectacular. A Godzilla hide leather strap. You can see a combination of black and red tones. This is the color Godzilla often assumes in Godzilla movies when Godzilla gets super radioactive. And that is also the inspiration for the dial, which was driven by the imagery of Godzilla's atomic fire breath. So you have these deep metallic rayons exploding out from the center with faceted, alternately satinated and polished indices and hands. Note the hands are exclusive to this watch, as are the indices. Then we have a power reserve indicator for the automatic winding 3-day power reserve, and just lots and lots to love. A full deployment clasp, once again, a limited edition of 650 pieces, and it is properly loomed. The bezel, with its sapphire cap, can be fully loomed with no danger of accidentally knocking off the loom. A very special watch that also includes a quick set date and hacking seconds. Throw it on the wrist and it is big. I know our own Jason Main, who has a large wrist, loves this model. You can see it's probably right at the limit on my wrist. I think your wrist has got to be either the size of mine or bigger in order to wear this watch well. You can see it's not over the edge, but it is a large thing. Then again, it is a Godzilla-themed watch. Maybe if we get a Mothra watch, it'll be better sized for a mid-sized wrist like mine, but I would recommend your wrist be no smaller than 16 centimeters circumference to wear Godzilla. All right, and if you need a bigger watch with even more complication, I have that too. Launched in 2008, this is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Concept Carbon. It's a combination of sapphire, forged carbon, ceramic, and titanium. Let's go through all this watch has to offer. So launched in 2008, it's technically a Royal Oak, not an offshore. It's a 44mm forged carbon case, and you can see this one has a few marks, but they blend in well with the forged carbon, which, because of its unidirectional layup, hides scratches and scuffs well. You can see that the strap is fully integrated into the profile of the lugs, and since the first Royal Oak concept back in 2002, they have always been very large watches with almost tonneau-shaped cases. The bezel is made of ceramic for scratch resistance. Of course, we have sapphires on the front and the back. The case back is made of titanium, as is the deployant clasp. And then we have a rubber gasket underneath the ceramic bezel. The ceramic bezel, by the way, still hand-finished in the traditional fashion to give it a combination of satin and polish. Now on the dial, we have a digital chronograph minutes indicator, and maybe we'll be able to see better how that operates right now as we are jumping from one minute to the other. We have a little digital scale where hands move underneath this grating, and they actually fill the apertures for the minutes and then the tens of minutes, and it jumps semi-instantaneously on the turn of the minute. We have a 1-minute tourbillon, free-sprung with that overcoil hairspring and adjusted in 5 positions, and that beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour over at 9 o'clock. It also features a leaf spring bridge, so it's a very shock-resistant tourbillon, and all of this is water-resistant down to 100 meters. This caliber 2985, and it has an immense power reserve of 237 hours, almost 10 days, manually wound. What you'll also note is that while the watch is constructed of alternative materials externally, it is also constructed of alternative materials internally. You can see underneath the power reserve indicator, there are actually bridges and plates made of forged carbon here. We have a multifunction crown. Crown and chronograph pushers are made of ceramic, and you can see now I am in remontage, or winding mode. I pull the crown out, heure minute. This is your setting mode. Then when I put the crown back in its center position, screwed in, it is in neutral. So you have that multifunction indicator, and you have a power reserve indicator for the 237 hours. The movement is built by Audemars Piguet René-Alfred, which is the ultra haute de gamme within Audemars Piguet. They also make all of the $1 million Richard Mille tourbillon and tourbillon complications. You can see on the reverse side that the column wheel for the column wheel lateral clutch chronograph is visible, and the column wheel action to the touch is outstanding. We'll throw this watch on my wrist, but I really recommend you have a wrist of at least 17 centimeters circumference to wear this watch. So I think your wrist needs to be at least 1 centimeter larger than mine, because this is too big for me. I will say though, all of sapphire, rubber, ceramic, titanium, and carbon, it's shockingly light for a watch this large. Let's stick with AP, but downsize a bit and upgrade the dial. A lot of folks liked everything about the 2019 Audemars Piguet Code 1159 except the dial. It's like they went all the way to 1159 and they didn't turn over to noon because they stopped 1 minute short of a fully realized concept. The dials looked flat and cheap. For 2020, that was fixed, and that's what we have right here. 41 millimeters in rose gold. This is the Code 1159 chronograph. It is a flyback chronograph with a 3-day automatic winding power reserve, and it uses a new gradient lacquered dial that starts cobalt blue at the center and darkens to almost black navy blue at the edge. You can see the sub-registers feature polished rose gold chapter rings, the hands, the numerals, the Audemars Piguet logo, all of this, the indices, rose gold. The dial now has real depth and color to it. And you can see that the watch has always had a beautiful case band, evacuated and prismatic. The lugs are really more like the flying buttresses of a Gothic cathedral. You can see that the center case has 8 facets like the Royal Oak, and the screws fixing the bars that retain the strap, they are hexagonal, another reference to the Royal Oak. The sapphire crystal actually dips in the middle. It has a dihedral to it. So this is very expensive and also very subtle. It's something you'll never notice if you just look at photos on the internet that look like this. You can also see the lugs as well as the edge of the case, all beautifully beveled to contrast the satin with the polish. And then on the reverse side, you can see caliber 4401, an automatic winding integrated chronograph. It is AP's first integrated automatic winding in-house chronograph caliber. It's bigger than the old 3126, which means that it fills the full case back. You can see it is a column wheel vertical clutch chronograph. The column wheel feel is exemplary, beats away at 4 hertz or 8 beats per second. It's a 40 jewel movement that's a combination of manual and mechanical finish, much like you'll find on FP Journe, and then it has a full balance bridge with a free sprung balance for better shock tolerance and precise setting without danger of disruption due to shock. Throw the watch on the wrist, it looks the part. A big dress watch, to be sure. I would recommend it for a wrist no smaller than 15 centimeters circumference, but it looks good on my wrist. You could get away with a little bit smaller, but it is a 50 millimeter lug-to-lug dimension, though it's only 12.9 millimeters thick, which makes it surprisingly compatible with tight dress sleeves. In the world of Patek Philippe, the Nautilus and the Calatrava are king. So this is an unusual watch that sort of splits the difference between the two. A sports watch, but out of the Calatrava collection, it's a 2018 release, 37.5 millimeters. It is the mid-size Calatrava Pilot Travel Time. This is the 7234R. It came out the same year as the 42 millimeter 5524R. So you get that lovely brown bronze sunburst pilot dial. You get 2 adjusters, and you can see how they actually lock. You unlock them with a counterclockwise quarter turn. Now you could set the local time. You can even cover up the reference hour hand if you do not need it, so you can clean up the dial substantially. What you do is first you set the reference time, that is the time where you are not, and then you set the local time. So you have that stub hand representing the time where you are not, and the solid hand representing the time where you are. There's a radial date down at 6 o'clock, and this is not a feature you often see on travel time watches. You have an AM/PM indicator, a day-night indicator, for both your locality and your reference locality. So this is where you are, this is where you're not, but you get an AM/PM for both. The quarter turn locks down the pushers for the travel time function, and then it has 60 meters of water resistance, which is twice any other Calatrava, and again, yes, unique among the Calatravas. You can see it uses broadsword cathedral-style hands and applique rose gold Arabic numerals, and it's probably the most luminous Calatrava ever created. At 37.5 millimeters, I don't see this as a ladies' watch. I see this as a true mid-size, as it's consistent with what would be considered, for example, a mid-size Royal Oak, 36 to 37 millimeters. The watch on my wrist is actually a perfect match, and it looks a lot more natural and discreet, as well as better proportioned than the enormous 5524, which is rated as a 42 but wears as a bigger watch. Now, of course, it features the same movement, caliber 325 SCFUS. This is the same movement that you'll get in a 5164 Aquanaut travel time. Beautifully hand finished and very accurate with a guaranteed precision of -3 + 2 seconds a day. It's also anti-magnetic with the silicone hairspring, and you can see just how much fine finish Patek gives you. Now, Patek is a mass manufacturer, so this isn't quite the level you get with Greubel Forsey or Laurent Ferrier, but unlike, for example, Audemars Piguet, which uses extensive machine finishing, such as on the Code 1159 we just saw, Patek will start these bridges and they'll start these bevels and they'll start these plates mechanically and then finish the execution by hand, and that really sets Patek apart. A lot of brands, even in high horology, no longer do that. You can see it features an aviator-style strap, calfskin on both sides, brown on the top with a contrasting stitch, a cross-hatching stitch, and then a Clevis-style counterweighted pin buckle designed to look like the pocket security flaps and latches on vintage aviation attire. So if you wanted to latch your pocket in the past, often it would be with a clip like this. And of course, that buckle is unique to the Calatrava pilots. We're not done with Patek. No, far from it. We're going back to the 90s. Mid to early 90s with this Patek Philippe 3970/00R. So most of the 3970s and 3971s featured conventional straps. This watch, which is part of the third series with the baton-style hands and the dart-style indices, is designed specifically for an integrated bracelet. As you can see, the lugs have been welded into place and they end right about there. They match the design of this cross-hatched chainmail bracelet, so you have a real integration into the case. And of course, it's 32.6 millimeters in diameter and 13 millimeters thick, 46 millimeters from lug to lug, so it's a nice compact watch. While it was retailed in February of 1999, that's what's on the original sales documents for this watch, you can tell that the watch is somewhat older than that, as if you look on the case band, you can see not only is it laterally hallmarked, but it features the rectangular punch and the Helvetic head that preceded the late 1995 arrival of the diamond shape with a dog's head. So while this watch was retailed in February of 99, you can see it was made prior to the second half of 1995. So you get a much better sense of when this watch would have been made. Now the timepiece features a perpetual calendar and a chronograph. You can see both of them on the dial side. Column wheel, lateral clutch chronograph. Flip it all over. We have caliber CH2770 based on the Lamagna 2310, which as the Omega 321 went to the moon. This is a much higher execution as we have Geneva hallmark finishing. The power reserve is upgraded from 48 to 65 hours. The flat hairspring becomes an overcoil hairspring. The free sprung balance replaces the mobile stud index. It is basically Patek's own movement using a Lamagna wheel train. As you can see, the finishing is exquisite. From any angle, you're going to get satination. You're going to get mirrored beveling. You're going to get richly ridged Cote de Genève and engine turning on the base plate with all screw heads black polished and their slots chamfered, as well as their circumference chamfered. You can see there is a capped column wheel and a lateral clutch, which is a pleasure to view and a pleasure to operate, and it has a nice winding detent, so while it is a manual wind watch, it will be a pleasure to do so. Again, a great Patek Philippe, and while more than 4,000 3970s and 3971s were made, very, very few of the integrated bracelet models were ever offered, and this is an outstanding example. Breguet. Are we ever going to appreciate modern-day Breguet? True, it has nothing to do with Abraham Louis Breguet. In style, it does. In engineering and tradition, no. There is a clean break between Breguet, his sons, and the modern-day Breguet company. That said, the people who make these watches are among the best in the industry, and Breguet is enormously invested in traditional fine finish, as well as equipment allowing the most traditional of executions, such as the use of straight line and rose lathe guilloche work on this solid gold dial. That's right, the dial is cut on a rose lathe and a straight line machine to create the patterns you see. It is solid gold that is then galvanized to create that silver white. As you can see, though the bridges look like a pocket watch architecture with a finger style individual train cock for each wheel. You can see the barrel at center. Then we have the great wheel, the third wheel, the fourth wheel, the escape wheel, and the balance. Even though it looks like a pocket watch architecture, right down to the use of pocket watch style spokes, you start turning it over and you can see it has mirrored anglage to a standard that would put most Audemars Piguet references to absolute shame. You can also see that the tops of the bridges as well as the base plate have been frosted, probably with a wire brush, which is a very traditional way to do this. And if you look carefully, you can see that the interior of the wheels as well as the inner circumference, all the spokes and inner circumference have been beveled with anglage that allows the junction of each spoke and rim segment to feature a sharp interior angle. You will find many Geneva hallmark watches that do not include that detail. You can find Abraham Louis Breguet's original parachute shock protection system over a Breguet overcoil hairspring, but take note, the balance, which includes a hacking mechanism, is very modern, as it is free-sprung with recessed gold bolts that pull the bolts out of the aerodynamic stream and allow the watch to keep better time. Even the small effect of aerodynamics on timing bolts can change the outcome for the watch, so Breguet recesses them into the rim. We have a power reserve indicator up at, well, it would be, I guess, conventionally 9 o'clock on the standard dial, or about 10 o'clock on a standard dial. You can see that on the reverse side, we have that same frosted finish. The power reserve indicator is more elaborate with the mechanism visible, and the bridge, I should say, rather, the base plate has been freehand engraved with the name of Breguet. So there is a lot of traditional craft art here. This is the 7057 from the Tradition family. You can see just how much depth this dial has. But the 7057 was a 2010 release that increased the size of the original 38mm Tradition to 40mm. So this white gold watch in 40mm is a nice contemporary size, neither large nor petite. And I could say that for people who want a bit more presence than the 7027, this gets it done without becoming a gaudy extravagance. The case is also beautifully made with welded lugs. The side, the coining, is cold rolled to create the coining and then hand finished to remove imperfections. So this is a very handmade case with the cold rolling and then the welding of the lugs. You can see the bar retaining the strap. It's a screw and bar setup, as we saw with the AP earlier, which gives you a lot of security against accidental release. A beautifully made watch. Breguet dress watches are super undervalued, as good as anything from Patek Philippe and Vacheron, and maybe even quite a bit better, and the Tradition represents the best among them. Okay, Romagotier. In 2013, he launched the Logical 1, which you see here. In 2021, he is discontinuing the Logical 1, which means for a brand that only made about 50 to 60 watches a year, you're talking a very small potential population of Logical 1 models, and this might be my favorite variant. 43mm in white gold. This is a watch that includes a Granfo enamel set of dials, a lovely gilded base plate and bridge array, and then you can see the traditional elements that made the Logical 1 the GPHG Complication Prize winner in 2013. You have the chain that is turned by the barrel and wraps around a snail cam. You have the trigger at 9 o'clock that winds the watch. Note the stop works. The stopwatch, or I should say stop works, stops the watch with enough energy left in the barrel that the second you start winding it, the balance jumps back into action. You can see Romagotier with the circle within a circle wheel design that he also supplies to Chanel for its high horology watches. There is a power reserve indicator on the reverse side. Note this watch does not just have sharp interior angles where bevels meet. We also have sharp exterior angles where beveled edges come to a point and converge, and that is just as difficult to do. You can see the entire chain for the fusee has been black polished. Now, the reason you want this chain and fusee mechanism is because as the barrel winds down, it has a 46-hour power reserve, its torque diminishes, but it pulls a larger effective lever arm as the snail cam expands as the barrel pulls the chain. So when the barrel is at its weakest, it's pulling the longest effective lever arm for maximum advantage, mechanical advantage, allowing it to maintain constant amplitude on the free sprung balance. This allows for excellent timekeeping. You wind the watch with the trigger at 9 o'clock, you set it with the crown at 2, and you can see the case is beautifully contoured, complex with compound curves, and recessed and media blasted shallow hollows within the lug profiles. It is a big watch at 43mm, but I could wear it. I'd recommend it for a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference or larger. Now, I always save the best for last, and more often than not, it's going to be a Longa, a Grubel Forci, some sort of rarity, or a Debatoon that takes the spotlight as we close, and that's exactly what we have right here with this DB28 Maxi Chrono, a model launched in 2014. It uses a Maxi Chrono design. Let me explain. 5 hands are coaxial at center. The chronograph features chronograph seconds in 60-second format, chronograph minutes, now watch this, in 60-minute format, and then hours in 24-hour format. So what you have is centrally located 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 24 hours, and then you have your hours and minutes of the day. It's that simple. It is a mono pusher with some of the finest column wheel feel you will ever encounter, and I'll explain that in a moment. Now the thing is, it has no jump in the chronograph as long as you start and hold. Just like that. That's how it works. It is a very crisp system that uses the absolute clutch. Now, Debatoon, this is a 46mm watch in zirconium floating lugs that adjust to the geometry of your wrist, 46mm rose gold canister. Debatoon makes the case, the dial, and the movement. And the movement, DB2030, is spectacular. First, you could see all of the bridges have been beveled on their edge and black polished on their top. Not some, all. The balance has a solid rim of white gold, and it's made of silicone to maximize the mass outboard. It is free sprung for durability. It has a hairspring that is two pieces clamped together, so it beats concentrically in any position like an overcoil, but it's flat and shock resistant like a flat hairspring. You'll also appreciate that this is a 5-day manual wind power reserve, even though the balance is beating away at 36,000 vibrations per hour. It is extravagantly hand-finished and engineered. It features 1, 2, 3 separate column wheels, activating 3 separate clutches. You have a vertical clutch style zero play mechanism for the seconds hand. You have an oscillating pinion, which is a type of lateral clutch that allows minimal play for the minutes hand. And then you have a traditional lateral clutch for the hours hand. So you get precision appropriate to each one. This makes for a crisp actuation, a smooth start, and efficient running, even if you want to leave the chronograph running for 24 hours a day. Look at that finish. Do you get that from FP Journe? Do you get that from any other brand, frankly, other than the likes of Grubel Forsey, Marco Lang, Kari Voutilainen, maybe Laurent Ferrier? Precious few. Even Moser, which I like, does not live up to this standard. This is truly best in the industry on both an engineering and an aesthetic basis. This is as good as it gets. Let's do a quick wrist shot here. Although it's a 46, don't be deceived, it wears easily on my wrist, and I can recommend it for a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference, though not any smaller. If you love this watch, reach out to me. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Time out, Tim out, have fun, and thanks for logging on.